you may have seen me downstairs directing traffic. I would like to welcome you this evening, both because I am the Executive Dean of NCC's Pocono campus here in Tannersville, and I'm very pleased to have you all here, but also because I am on the board of Monroe County Historical Association, and we are thrilled that these traveling Thursday lectures have gotten such a great response. They're always interesting, and we love that people are coming out to share this with us. I wouldn't be doing my job as an NCC person if I didn't say we have brochures that will be available outside for various programs, whether they're community involvement, personal enrichment like cooking classes and art classes. We also have currently Horizons for Youth summer classes for kids, so if you have family members who are looking for things for their kids to do during the week, during the summer, and information for our credit programs. If you know people who are interested in getting a degree, or if you yourself feel like you want to get another degree, we have those too. And so, don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to thank you all and welcome you this evening. Enjoy. I'd also like to introduce our History Committee Chair, John Abel.
Thanks. Thank you, Trustee. Hello, good evening, welcome to Third Thursday. Before I tell you how delighted I am to see all of you, I'm supposed to tell you that right outside that door is ice water. If you, I know it's very warm, so if you want some ice water, it's right outside that door. And it would also be appreciated if you would silence your cell phones for the presentation this evening. Okay, with that aside, it is wonderful to see such a terrific turnout tonight to listen to the details of the flood of '55, which is a fascinating topic, an event that touched thousands and thousands of lives, and an event that I'm sure will live in the communal memory for many, many years. We are privileged to have with us tonight to talk about the flood David Koster. He is recently retired and returned to the area, and he likes to hike, he likes to bike, and he's a great volunteer at the Historical Association. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dave Koster.
Welcome everyone. I mean, come on, this is amazing. I really appreciate everyone coming out. I think it shows a great interest not only in the topic, but I'm going to look at it as an indication of how well liked and how well respected my dad was. So first, let me thank again John, Amy, Tanya, Julia, Brett, everyone associated with the museum who's allowed me to be here tonight and has supported me in developing the program and bringing us to this moment. Who among us was here in one form or another during the flood? Wow. Okay. I really hope this does the event justice, because you know things that I could never know. I was born in 1960. I've been fascinated by the subject and have done my research, but please understand that I wasn't there. And really this presentation is meant as a reference through the pictures that my dad took. And I'll do my best to relate the stories, not only from that time, but to give you a sense of the history and how that event has affected the way we live life here today. So the next question is, who here personally knew my dad? Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate you coming. I do want to introduce a special guest, Liz Koster in the second row, my dad's wife of 36 plus years. And we're doing our best to keep his memory alive. So where were we in August of 1955? It was record heat and drought throughout the Northeast, not just in this area, but the whole Northeast. Flooding was a distant memory. For most people, they're thinking, it hasn't happened in a long time, it's not going to happen now. Weather forecasting was very unsophisticated, as was the communication. If they knew that something was coming, we didn't have the way of broadcasting that and delivering that information into the masses very well. And people were glad for the rain when it finally came. Right? How many times did we hear, well, we need the rain. So the flood event occurred because of a very rare confluence of two hurricanes. The first one, Connie, which hit the area August 11th through the 14th, dropped 4 to 10 inches of rain in various locations. On the heels of Connie came Diane, which occurred August 17th through the 19th, and it was the real dumper. It dropped 10 plus inches of rain across the Delaware Valley, including the Broadhead Creek watershed. So I want to call your attention to this picture that I posted here. This is a picture I took myself last fall from the top of Mount Wismer in Barrett Township. And Mount Wismer is where the Broadhead Creek headwaters begin. So everything that you're looking at in this picture, going from north to south, is really an indication of the Broadhead Creek watershed, including, if you look well in the back here, you can see that little split. That's the Delaware Water Gap. So you're talking about a huge amount of land in both length and width to collect rainwater. Right? And this is going to play into our story as we tell it as we go along. So I love this passage. This is a passage I got from a great book called Devastation on the Delaware by Mary Schaefer. If you're interested in the topic and you've not read this book, I highly recommend it. You can get copies at the Hughes Library. You can get it on Amazon for a couple of bucks. It's definitely worth a read. She did a wonderful job of researching a lot of the sources of the day and telling you stories. So what she says is, an inch of rain over an acre of ground adds up to 27,150 gallons, or 113 tons of water. Multiply that by 10 inches of rain is 1,130 tons of water distributed over each acre. This water and its weight are pulled by gravity to seek the lowest elevation. So the Broadhead Creek watershed encompasses thousands of mountainous acres. Water drains down through steep and narrow valleys. For instance, Bushnell Hill has an elevation of 2,112 feet, located 17 miles from the Stroudsburgs, which are at 550 feet. Its runoff gains momentum from the drop of nearly 100 feet per mile. So it's not only gaining speed this way, as it comes off the mountains down into the creek beds, the creek valleys, but it's also gaining momentum going downhill as it runs from north to south. It's all this tonnage of water. Picture a funnel, a regular household funnel. If you sprinkle water on the outer parts, the bowl of the funnel, and the water is pulled down by gravity, it gains momentum as it comes down the side, and then it narrows into a smaller outlet. And physics will tell you that the water coming through that narrow outlet is going to gain speed and pressure. So this plays into what we're going to see as we tell our story. So who was Al Koster in 1955? He was a 25-year-old. He recently returned from Penn State and from the Army in Alaska. He was living at his parents' house at 112 East Brown Street in East Stroudsburg, working at his parents' store, Koster's Variety on Crystal Street, where Tony's Pizza is now, if you're not familiar. He was engaged to be married to my mom, and he was a budding photographer. He was not a professional at this point, but he was building his talent and mastering his craft because he would soon become a professional. But at this point, he was a hobbyist. In the days following the flood, Al ventured from his home on East Brown into town and into the air to capture the devastation. Hundreds of photos, if not thousands, were taken by dozens of photographers, but his differed in that they were in color. I don't know how many frames he actually took those days, but we have 50 of the original 35mm slides, which are now in the museum collection. What follows is a sampling of those images, along with what happened to create those images and how some of those locations look today. Let's take a look. So this to me is a fascinating picture because it may look like there's not much, but there's so much going on here. And I want to make really clear, as best I can, what we're looking at. So notice the location is routes 191 and 447. Back then it was 90 and 290. And this is the site that most of you have heard of, called Davis Cabins. And I do want to mention for people who aren't really up on the details, but a lot of times you hear this called Camp Davis. And that's kind of a common term. But I want to make sure for anyone who isn't really clear, it was not camp as we had on the Delaware where kids came from the city or from nearby and stayed overnight and were run by counselors and so on. This was a community, a village of cabins, cottages, small houses that families owned or rented for the summer. So picture, as was probably common in the day, the mom would come up with the kids, maybe the grandparents, maybe aunt or uncle, and stay all summer in one of these houses. And then the dad would travel during the weekends while he wasn't working from Philadelphia or Jersey or New York, stay the weekend and then go back to work for the week. That's the nature of what this Davis Cabins was rather than a kids camp. That doesn't minimize the tragedy that happened there, but I just want to make sure that picture is clear for everyone, that it was not a bunch of kids that just... So again, not to minimize the tragedy, but just to make sure that's clear. So the camp, or the Davis Cabins area, was located right in this triangle. And you can see a couple of things I want to point out. This is pretty much the same configuration that where we have 5th Street running into 447. We got Hallett Road, and there's 5th Street going back. You also have this train, which was there in the worst of the flood. And so why this is significant, this is the most northern picture that I'm going to show you tonight. So again, think of the flow of the creek from north to south. This is the most northern picture that we have. So what was happening here is, again, going back a couple slides where we're talking about all that water developing momentum coming down from the mountains. In the process of it coming down, it was causing a lot of damage, picking up trees and shrubs, houses, machinery, all kinds of flotsam and jetsam, and in places clogging up the creek and not allowing the flow of water to come down in its natural flow. So it was creating a damming effect in several places up creek. Over time, when that water, those tons and tons of water, built up enough weight and pressure behind those dams, it broke through. Came barreling down the creek through Analoming. And by the time it got to here, what do you notice about the flow of the creek? It's got this nice, gentle, westerly bow that would normally go around where all this humanity and civilization is. Well, picture a 20 to 30 foot wall of water, many hundreds of yards wide, coming down a creek bed. Is it going to politely follow the bow of the creek? Of course not. So again, take all those tons and tons of water and have it barrel straight through this piece of land, and you can understand why there's nothing left. The only thing that we see here is in the center of the picture, you might see a little bit of a foundation of one structure right in the middle. I don't know that I can point my laser pointer to it, but it looks just like a square. And that's about it. There's not a whole lot else left. You can also notice underneath the train where the bank has been completely washed away, eroded away. Right? Of course, the bridges are knocked out. This train was there, and while there were no passengers on it, the crew of the train did ride it out on the roof of those train cars. A couple hundred yards away from where all this devastation was taking place. They report hearing pretty much everything that was going on the ground just down below them. And it was horrible. So here's that area today. Now I do want to take a second, if I may. I want to give a quick shout to my son Daniel. When I told him I was doing this project, he strongly suggested that I myself, for authenticity's sake, hire an airplane and go around and take these same pictures myself. I did opt for Google Earth for the sake of economy and safety. I'm sure you'll understand. And with the exception of the inability to adjust for altitude and the very weird thing Google Earth does to bridges, I think we're able to see pretty well what I'd like for you to see. So what do you notice about this picture in relation to the previous version? What's the main difference between these two? Yeah, the path of the creek now, and this is one of the mitigation steps that were done by the Army Corps of Engineers, is they straighten the creek. So here is the Davis Cabins property, right? Here's the bridge, here's Hallett Road. And what you have here now, and many of you have probably been there, is Pine Brook Park. And what you'll notice, the thing I want you to see here is there's still water here. And there's still water that Hallett Road goes over, and Fifth Street goes over, and if you follow it this way, it empties out into the creek over here. And if you've ever walked the trail in Pine Brook Park, there are several wooden footbridges with little streams there, little wetlands, and what you are walking over is the original bed of the Broadhead Creeks. Sorry about that. All right. So it's fascinating to me the way this area and the land has changed because of the result of the flood and the mitigation features that the Army Corps put in. Here's a slightly more southern view of that same area. And again, you can see this is now where Pine Brook Park is. This is 5th Street. Here's the Pine Brook Camp, little half moon of cabins that are still there. And you had 3 bridges that had to be replaced. Over the railroad, over 5th Street, and then over Hallett Road, or on Hallett Road. And this is another fascinating picture. I can zoom into some of this. Again, you can see, here's the Davis Cabins land, wiped completely clean, no trees, no anything. See the damage that was done to the railroad beds, to the banks, just to the west of the tracks, how the tracks were destroyed here, the road beds were destroyed, the land was eroded away. So it's pretty devastating. And really, when you go through there, I mean, it's been repaired and reconfigured, but just so you know now that it was like that at one time. All right, so the plan here is to move south. The water hit up there, Davis Cabins, and it's continuing to move south. Next stop these Stroudsburg flats. So I'm sure many of you know this area. There's two things to really take notice of here. One is the number of houses that are no longer there, and the brown. So contrast the brown here in the center, I can't show you that, with just above Henry Street where it's nice and green. So this brown is really where all the water came in and deposited the mud, rocks, debris that it was carrying. So not only was this water wide, but it was very deep. And most of these houses were up to their first and second floors. So the other thing to notice here is this part of where the creek comes in is like a beach. And there wasn't a whole lot holding the water back. So again, you can see a little gentle bend in the creek, but it's still barreling down from where it hit the first time. And it's continued to come through straight ahead. And it washed all the way up here. And if you know this area, this is not a short distance between the center of the creek and how much it covered here. So all these vacant areas are an indication that something was knocked down. And people, oftentimes with the people in it. So we're also looking, as we go a little farther south, we've got the Stroudsburg playground and the pool to the far right, the Department of Transportation sheds, the little 2.5 Day Street, the mini house there up on the right. For those of you that are familiar, still there. And this is that area today. And so a lot of the changes have been that new houses and apartment complexes have been built there in the flats. The dike, or the levee, that was built around it to protect from rising water coming in. So it's recovered pretty well, which is a good thing. But for those of you that remember that, you know that was hit pretty darn hard. So we've landed the plane, and we're taking a look from Day Street to the East Stroudsburg Park Pool House. I'll zoom into this. Probably a very familiar sight for many. Where these cars came from could be anywhere, but they were picked up and moved because they were not there originally. And this is what that looks like today. Now I've heard stories, now somebody can just give a thumbs up or thumbs down, that cars actually ended up in the pool. Confirm or deny? Confirm, inside the pool, in the pool, over the fence in the pool.
Correct.
We have a confirmation.
Right off of Martin Street.
Barney. Yeah. So here now we're looking at the other side, the Stroudsburg side, coming just slightly south. Broadhead Creek, Interborough or State Bridge, east portion, west portion, McMichael's Creek, flowing into the Broadhead. McMichael's also reached flood stage and was contributed to flooding out Ann Street, Lower Main. So what we're looking at here is, we've got 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, and a lot of devastation along Lower Main. The sewage treatment plant, the electrical station there. And again, the brown is really the indication of how much water there was and how wide that spread out from the creek. I know there are stories from, I don't know a lot of stories from this flats area because most of those buildings still exist. But the lower Main area, a lot of stories about how high the water was in those houses that are still there, those brick doubles that are along lower Main, that the water definitely filled up the ground floors. A lot of the stores and so on were there, had significant damage. And that's the area today. Again, biggest difference would be, other than some spaces being used differently, the building of the levees all the way along. And there's another, I think, pretty interesting picture. If you want me to stay on these longer, I'm happy to. So let me know if you're looking at them, what you want to see. So this large building in the center, that's what was the Worthington Mower Company. That building's still there. I think it's a body shop and several other businesses. The Stroudsburg Brewery building right behind it. And again, you can see 1st Street, 2nd Street, a lot of mud all the way up to 3rd Street. The only reason it didn't go farther than that is because, as you know, just to the west of 3rd Street is that cliff. It climbs very quickly, and that was as far as the water got. But you can see how much mud is deposited in these areas. Is anyone centered in this area? They live in this area or know anybody that did? You travel in this part of town? I know we had some folks from the East Stroudsburg Flats, right?
I had a friend who was a child living in the Stroudsburg Flats, and they went up to the cliff. Someone was making handholds into the cliff that they could climb up on Phillips Street.
All right, so this is really interesting to me as well. So this is the East Stroudsburg, Lincoln Avenue area. And again, I'll highlight the creek, the tracks through town, Silk Mill, or many of us knew it as Redmond Finishing, the Armory, Brown Street, Washington Street, Lincoln Avenue. So again, 2 things to notice here. 1, all the houses. This was, with the exception of the mill and these railroad buildings, this is 100% residential. Plus a boarding house or 2, but it was all houses. The second thing, again, is the brown. How far in the water came. So there are, again, just like in the other picture of the flats, there are spaces here where there were houses the day before that are not there anymore. And many of the stories are told that the people that were in these houses that refused to leave ended up spending the night on the roof because the water came up 1st floor, 2nd floor, and possibly into the attic, and they had no choice but to keep going up. And they were clinging to the roofs. Now, even though there's still a handful of houses here, there were quite a few that had to be demolished because they were uninhabitable afterwards. So this is that area now. Obviously, it's not residential anymore. It's converted 100% retail. So I don't really know what the economics and politics were at the time, but I have to imagine that all that destruction could have hastened this transition from residential to commercial. I know in my day, mid-60s, we had friends that lived down there, and going into that neighborhood, I don't remember very many houses. So I'm sure there was developers that came along and said, wow, all this open space, if you're not going to put new houses on it, what can we do with it? And those of us that were around in the day, we know that in the early 70s, Pocono Plaza was built on the east side of Lincoln Avenue with the France and Carvel and Brother Bruno's and that whole strip of business there, the Carol's Hamburger on the corner. And from there on, it wasn't long before there was a Walmart and the rest of what you see here today. So did that flood 10, 15 years earlier have an impact? Probably. Oh, not what I meant to do, but... So if I were to say the names, what would the following names mean? Anybody knows? Hancock, Garfield, Harrison, Gilbert, and Rose. Hancock, Garfield, Harrison, Gilbert, and Rose. What's the significance of those names? Yeah. So in this neighborhood, there were streets where the houses were located, and those were the names of the streets. And because of the flood, those streets have been literally wiped off the map. They don't exist anymore. Lost to history. So again, we landed the plane and we took a walk over to Washington Street, and we're looking west towards the State Bridge or the Interborough Bridge. And a lot of us remember this configuration: Traders, Flour and Feed, Patent Reds, Heller's Market, and the white building being Price's Garage. And the story goes that Harry and Mrs. Heller, any Heller descendants here? All right, so the story goes that I read was that Harry and Mrs. Heller, I think her name was Ruth, when they heard the water was rising, they flew down to the store, went in to try to salvage some merchandise and equipment by moving it upstairs. No sooner did they get in the building, but the water started coming in, and it was coming in fast, to the point where the windows broke out, and they realized this is not a good idea, and they went upstairs, leaving the merchandise where it was. But when they realized the water was coming up even to where they were, they had to get out. And so they climbed out a back window and stood on the roof of the restaurant that was behind the building. I've been told Lindy Lunch / Bucket of Blood, if that sounds familiar to anyone. But they stood on the roof of this building, and when it started to shake, they climbed up into what I'm assuming is this tree. And they rode out the storm, clinging to this tree and each other until they could be rescued the next morning. So this is that view today. Here's the corner of the armory. And I've been told this is not the same building, I don't recall. The building was replaced by the Salvation Army building. This is in the same location as Traders. This building, which was the Patent Reds, is now a GAK construction building. But the other buildings in the front, the Heller and the Price Garage, are no longer there because of reconfiguration of the road, and they put that Veterans Memorial Park at the point of the road. Look familiar? So we're walking around the block, and we're looking at the wreckage of what's often called the State Bridge or the Interborough Bridge. You see the east span here and the west span in the background. The commemorative plaque showing the bridge was erected in 1904. This famous picture of the bus underneath, I'm pretty convinced that the bus was not on the bridge, but it was washed in a very strange manner to end up there. But as you look across, you see over on the Stroudsburg side, the water tower, the electrical system there, and not a lot of bank to keep the water out. And that's, again, we're moving south from the beginning. It knocked through Davis Cabins, came down through the flats. It's still coming down to this area, knocking out everything that's fed. Now don't forget, it already knocked out the bridge at Stokes' Mill on its way here. And this is what it, pardon, yes?
Was the bus found empty, or were there any occupants?
I don't believe there were any occupants to it. I'm not, you know, I'm honestly, I wish I could give you a definite answer, but I'm pretty sure this was not, I'm pretty sure this was not a fatality situation with the bus. I think the bus just ended up there. Remember, this happened in the middle of the night, basically, or in the evening. It started to go, so they were very, very unlikely that there was kids traveling in the bus.
You said that's a water tower. I think it was something for gas or something.
Okay.
A water tower.
I stand corrected, gas, something with gas, and the gas company is still in that location, so you're more than likely correct. Yeah.
Right here on the side of the dike, if you go across the bridge, you'll see a bunch of pipes up down there because there's dioxin buried down in there. They just left it.
Good. Thank you for that. All right, and this is what it looks like today. So you'll see the new bridge with the arch, concrete wall, and of course the levees built on both sides. To take this picture, I came down up and over the levee right there next to the bridge on the East Stroudsburg side and climbed down to where I could approximate where my dad was standing when he took the picture. And behind me was a lot of dike, a lot of levee behind me. So it's pretty high up there. If you've never been on that side, on the creek side. So it's interesting to me, the original bridge was there for 50 plus years, and the replacement has been there for nearly 70. It seems, when you start thinking of the chronology in that way, it's interesting how much time has gone by. So here's a series of interesting shots that he took on Brown Street near the intersection of Lincoln Avenue, looking west towards the bridge. And I'm assuming that he's either directly behind the Armory or just up Brown Street a little bit, maybe in front of the Sabrinsky house. I'm not positive. But there's a lot to be seen in these pictures. Again, you get a nice close-up view of the debris that was deposited. I don't want me to do both. All right, so you can see the rocks and the mud, all the debris in the background, of course the overturned cars, and a very famous picture right in the center of the frame here, that car leaning against the side of Price's garage. That's been taken from many angles and by many photographers. You can see that back there, kind of a cream color car between the shed and the building. The back of Traders, showing some damage. Corn crib, I'm assuming that's what that is. And the corner up in the top left corner, you can see the imposing Redmond Finishing building and a lot of debris on the ground. And people out taking a look, a close look.
Dave, do you know how long after the flood these pictures were taken?
I am not positive. I'm going to say a couple of days. Yeah. And this is the most difficult picture I had to recreate because that fence that's behind the armory now made it really impossible to stand in the exact place and get the same angle. So instead I walked up a little bit to behind the Salvation Army and just tucked inside their fence. But basically you're seeing the same perspective. Most of us have been through there enough to kind of have an idea what that looks like there. But at one point it was very much underwater. Basically the same view, just turned a little bit to the southwest. And I'll zoom in on this. So again, you see a lot of debris deposited, people out looking. I am not positive, but if you look at the side of the mill, across the top of the bottom windows, does that look like a water line to you? That's what I thought. So that gives you just an indication. And those of us that were around, you know that's an imposing building. It's a very large building. And so that gives you an idea how high the water was there. Contrast that to a house, a average size house, the water was up pretty high. And I'm also told too that right in the foreground here, well in the middle of this frame, there were houses there that were completely destroyed. And you can see, I'll show you another picture that shows some of the debris. And again, same basic spot, but you can see damage to the back of traders here, over here, all this debris, cars all over the place. Looks like they tied this rope to something on the back of this car, like it's trunk support or something. A better view. The amount of debris that's just laying around here. Quite a mess. The damage to the green building there, back of traders. And then we've turned all the way to the south and we're looking straight down Lincoln Avenue. So again, this gives you a sense of its residential nature at the time. With a fairly narrow road, the house is close to the street. I don't know if anyone else remembers, but this building has significance in my life because the people that lived there were family friends. So if anybody remembers, it was Liebfeld's Grocery. And it was a twin house, and Mrs. Liebfeld, Rebecca Liebfeld, lived on the right side. And she had a little grocery store for the neighborhood on the bottom. And she spent the night on the roof. I remember hearing those stories. And if you have ever seen Helen Brown's narrative, her video, where she narrates the stills that she took, she's actually got a picture on the same corner when the Mennonites came up to help do the cleaning. She describes how they went into Liebfeld's Grocery, took out the contaminated products and helped her dispose of them. So this is where you'll know where it is. But that's why I said when I was 5, 6 years old and we were going down there, and I can remember playing back there, there weren't many houses left. It was that one and a couple here and there, but not many. But again, you get a sense of how much mud was deposited. I'll zoom in so you can see in the back, it looks like there's a lot of debris back there, maybe some construction equipment already doing some cleaning.
All the canned goods out of all the grocery stores that have been flooded and burned them.
Yeah.
And people were trying to take them, use them. but they were afraid of typhoid, and they were giving typhoid shots at the churches and things. It was a big problem.
Yes, for sure, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and if you read the stories, there was a lot of public works. I mean, there was a lot of public input to make sure there was clean water brought in, there was food available, there was clothing available. So the community really did pull together. My mom tells a story. Now, I'll just briefly tell the story that my mom tells, is that she and my dad were engaged, not married yet. They were married that November. But she was working in Bushkill at Barrow Lodge, and Barrows were good friends of her parents. She was working summers at Barrow Lodge, and she came down into town for the day to hang out at my dad's house where his parents lived. And the flood hit, and she couldn't go home because all the ways back to Bushkill were knocked out. So she had to stay for a couple of days in town, which she said at the time, it was great. But she said then that my grandfather, Leon Koster, who owned Koster store, opened the store and said, "Come in, take whatever you need. No charge. Just take what you need. Flashlights, clothing, batteries, whatever it happened to be." And that was the sense of the community in the aftermath. A lot of great stories about that. And this is what it looks like today, a far cry from what it was. But we all know it probably pretty well. And here they're telling us to keep out. So we will leave this area, but again, you can see the mill in the back and debris scattered about, cars just everywhere. And again, this to me is a very fascinating picture. It does show that same area from a slightly different angle than we looked at before. But look in the back. And it really points out, I don't know that he intended to do this to show the contrasts, but when you look at the foreground and the damage and devastation and how ugly it is, but then when you look in the background and see such a beautiful place that we live, mountains, and you can see a little slice of the river right here, right? Of course, the college and the hospital, St. Matthew's Church, the neighborhoods up here that were not touched at all. So again, I don't know if he intended to do that, but it's a pretty stark picture, pretty interesting. But also, this other close-up view of that area. So again, you see the Armory, Traders, Patent Reds, Heller's, Price's Garage, and then right at the bottom is that colorful collection of cars down there that just sort of accumulated in a spot where I guess the current brought them and dropped them. But what a mess. I mean, and again, you can look into the neighborhood a little bit and see again how devastated that area was. So we're continuing south, and the devastation continues. Right? There's still so much energy left in that water that it didn't slow down. And at this point, it's made a pretty much 6-mile trek since we began at Davis Cabins. And this is now Bell's Crossing, or the paper mill area in Minnesink Hills. And you can see this place was completely demolished. Same event. I do not have a current version of this, but I plugged this in really, again, just to illustrate that this did not let up. And this should be familiar to most of us. We pretty much left the Broadhead Creek. The Broadhead is already emptied into the Delaware, But that was not the end of the story. The Delaware, along with its other tributaries that came in, really had its own, all the way down to pretty much to Bucks County from way north into Matamoros and above, all the way down into Bucks County. They had flooding along the Delaware. So Shawnee, which, as we know, is prone to flooding, was not escaped in this one either, had not escaped. And not a whole lot different in that area, just the addition of a few buildings. But I wanted to tell that story too. And now to put a nice bow around our then and now perspective, I show you this clip from the Daily Record, July 1956, and the caption reads, "A long look backward for young men and women who are helping rehabilitate East Stroudsburg Playground came last night with the showing of color slides of the August 1955 flood that did the damage. Slides were taken and shown by Albert Koster, shown in the center foreground here. During showing, members of the American Friends Service Committee project group in the background asked questions about the flood. For the young people, it was the first direct look at original damages. So my dad had the privilege of sharing these pictures with the community then, as I've had the same privilege 68 years later to show them to you. And for that I'm honored.